Thanks for coming along to what is our final show and tell for now for the digital engagement work that we've been doing with Camden and Middlesbrough and Bucks and a whole bunch of other councils that have been involved. So thanks for your participation so far. We'll talk to you today about where we've landed with the digital site notice, show you the latest designs based on user feedback, and also the planning engagement playbook and the next steps to take both of them forward. Rich, hand over to you.
Cool. Yeah. So on the back of discovery work that Camden did around maximising social value in planning, this was prior to COVID, we identified this problem of barriers in planning engagement and them happening throughout the whole process. And in particular, those barriers are felt by certain groups more than others as well. And then COVID came along, we had to rapidly respond to shift engagement into digital channels. And the sector really sort of pulled together and shared a lot of learning around things, like really quickly getting participatory planning committees back up and running. But then we saw an opportunity to, as we shift towards digital channels for these engagement, we looked at things like site policies and pre-app engagement to try and improve that sort of depth in terms of who we were reaching, but also the quality of the engagement as well. And thinking about how we collect information as well. It was very siloed, and so there was an idea that maybe we could start to think about how we collect it more effectively to try and reuse it across the whole planning process. So we've been looking at producing a playbook for local authorities so that we don't lose all of that shared learning and all that cooperation that's been happening between councils, and to try and kind of keep that knowledge and sort of best practice going to try and encourage improved engagement practices in planning. And then the other strand of the work we've been looking at is focusing in on site notices, and planning site notices are a bit of a lost opportunity as a point of engagement in planning. They're really sort of the window or doorway into planning engagement for a lot of people. But obviously in COVID, people wouldn't go outside and see them as much in lockdown. So we thought, well, how can we take those digital? How can we improve the information on them though, so that people really understood a proposal? And could we use that opportunity to get engagement with people who have low engagement rates, like young people, for example, in particular, very low engagement rates in planning. So we looked at two strands on that, and what could we do with the data we've got now to try and improve a planning site notice, but then also what would an ideal future state look like? And we'll take you through those in a bit. I'll just hand over to Jono now.
Thanks, Rich. I'm Jono, and Britt can probably put you onto the next slides. So as part of our user testing, this is what one of the users said. They were looking at the site notice and they didn't really understand what kind of feedback they could give to a planning application, and they didn't understand the process. And I think this highlights the issue with planning consultation. It's difficult for those outside the planning system to understand it, and the way we engage and use feedback really needs to evolve. And this ties in with the philosophy of the white paper, which is for plans and development to be neighbourhood-led, to have more engagement at local level. It encourages digital advancement, and local plans and planning submissions will become digital and more simplified. And these kind of cornerstones of the white paper tie in with what our project is doing. We're looking at a toolkit which looks at how to best engage, and also a digital site notice which could be used at all parts of the planning process, and it could be a way to engage widely and meaningfully and help us simplify and digitalize planning. So you can probably flip to the next slide. This is another quote from a well-known planning officer, and again it highlights that us in planning, or in the planning as planning professionals, we understand all the jargon and all the things associated with planning. Something like the red line, which is a fundamental part of an application, might not be known to someone looking at a site notice. It might not make sense. So how do we use the site notice as a tool to make the planning process more user-friendly? And I mean, we think this tool could help alleviate some of the issues. I'll pass you on to Alex now, who's going to give you an overview of the process behind the site notice.
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm an interaction designer at FutureGov. Our approach to designing the digital planning notice over the last 12 weeks involved desk research into current attitudes, interests, and behaviours around place-based engagement, including insights from Camden's social value and planning work, and findings from a report by Shelter around social and economic measures that people care about, for example, green space and local jobs. We defined a set of hypotheses and assumptions to test through joint workshops with local authority officers. We developed a number of prototype designs to test with residents, and then we tested those with 7 residents. We updated the designs based on the feedback and created a future state and an MVP version, so a minimum viable product. So something that we could build immediately without having to change anything. And we started to explore the feasibility of our designs based on the availability of current data. So if we move to the next slide, so I'm now going to show you some screenshots of the slides of the site notice. So this just shows the homepage, and you've got a map that you can navigate. And there's also a list version. You can see the developments in your area. Next slide. And then if you click on those developments, you get to a page that shows you more detail about that. It gives you an overview of where we are in the planning timeline, and it also pulls out different impact measures, or so different impacts that the development will have on the local area, and you can then give feedback on those different categories. If you go to the next slide. Yeah, so you can see for each of the impact categories, it gives you some detailed information, and then you can give some feedback on that. And once you submit your feedback, it gives you the option to subscribe to email updates, and gives you some more feedback about what other people said. I can also show an interactive demo of this. Right, so this is the prototype. As I said, you've got the map view here, and then you can either put in your postcode, or it locates you automatically, and it will show developments in that area. And then you can click on the development, and you get to the overview page, so it highlights where that development is. We also describe the development in plain English. So currently this development we've called mixed redevelopment, which we found people didn't really understand what that meant. So we've kind of used plain English to spell it out what it is. There's a short description of the development. There's information about how long the construction will take. We give a timeline, which you can expand to show more, and then we break down the different impacts. So here we've got environment, new homes, office space and transport. We've identified more categories than that, but these are the ones we have in the prototype for now. And then if you click into that, then you get some detail about each of these impact categories. So there's a description, we pull out some key metrics, and then we ask for your feedback. We also show what other people have said, so you can kind of get a sense of what the rest of the community thinks. And then clicking through, you have some questions and sentiment analysis. You can fill those in, and it gives you some feedback on those answers. And then you can also give some sort of plain text feedback. So if you have some more detailed feedback that you want to give, and then you can get the thank you page, and again that recaps what people have said, and you can go back to the beginning and add feedback to other areas. You can also share that, get a link to share that in WhatsApp or on Twitter or Facebook. So that's the demo. Should we go back to the slides? Yeah, so the next steps for this are to do further testing, so to test the interactions and ensure users can complete the tasks. So make sure that all users can navigate using the map or the alternative list view, and to make sure that users can navigate to other developments of interest. test alternative questions and feedback mechanisms. So we need to ensure that the feedback is relevant to users and that it's also actionable for planning officers, and to also make sure that users understand why they're giving the feedback and how it'll be used, and to test the impact measures are relevant to users. So do these categories make sense to the users? Do they understand why those have been pulled out and what they mean to the local area? Are they relevant? And do they understand what the feedback would be and how it would be used? More next steps is we're documenting the data that needs to be captured in order to drive that design. So we're looking at the current available data and working out how that needs to be structured in order to be used in the site notice, and also what data might be missing and what we might need to gather in the future.
Okay, I'm going to talk through the next section. My name's Harriet. I'm the service designer of FutureGov on this project. I'm going to talk to you about this service map that we've produced. So I'm going to have to take you to the actual service map, which is here. What this is it's a kind of oh gosh, my computer's being a bit slow. It's a diagram that shows the customer journey. So along the top here we have the journey that a resident would go through when they were finding a site notice, viewing a site notice, giving feedback, and then staying engaged. And then what this map shows is how all of the different parts in the system need to interact in order for this to make this journey happen. So down the side we've got what we call touch points. So this is anything that the resident might directly come into contact with. So for example, like the digital site notice is a touch point, a technology touch point. And then we have all these backstage things, and these are split by staff, systems and legislation. So anything that is backstage is something that a resident wouldn't see necessarily, but it's something that's happening in the background. And either it's an action by a staff member, it's something that a system is doing, or it's a piece of legislation that means that we've got the data, for instance, that then can feed into the site notice, which a resident sees. What this map shows us is what the gaps are. So doing this process of looking at like what we've produced is helpful in thinking about what have we missed, like what do we need to build in order for the resident to have this experience. And also it's useful for thinking about what's the future areas of development. So what are the new opportunities for us to improve this experience and make this journey better. So the colour coding that you can see on this diagram is anything in purple is about the future. And anything in pink is what we've built. It was in scope for this project. So you can see that what was in scope for this project was the part where a resident views a site notice and the part where the resident gives feedback. So what we've built here in the dotted pink boxes was the digital site notice and some of the feedback mechanisms, which means that there are quite a lot of future opportunity areas. So this first opportunity area here is about helping a resident to find a site notice. So at the moment we've built something, but we're very aware that we've not done a huge amount of thinking about where that thing will live. So this area is about thinking about social media, but also the physical site notice and how do people who can't get online easily still engage with this process. The opportunity area 2 is down here, and this is all about data standards. So this sits more in systems and legislation, because this will be about the legislative requirement that means that we can get the data that we need from developers, and also then about the kind of systems that are used to get that data into a digital format that then becomes the site notice. And the third opportunity area here is about using feedback. So this is we will be collecting feedback through the site notice, but we need to think about how the council actually uses that feedback and what happens afterwards as a result of that feedback. So I'm just going to come back to the main slides. So the opportunity area 1 around discoverability, so finding a site notice, and engagement, like how different residents can engage. So the kind of recommendations are that we consider social media channels and conduct testing with users to see how they search for and find information. Design a physical notice that's in line with the digital one that we've produced. Obviously, the new content that is on the digital site notice is based on testing. And so the physical one needs to action some of the things that we found from that research. Considering the site notice as a window to the planning system. So this one is about the opportunity to promote other areas of engagement through site notices. So site notices, the ones that we are testing and using at the moment are about large developments, but could a site notice also be used in policy making or in the local plan? And proactively engaging community groups. This was something that we didn't have time. It was out of scope for our project this time round, but we know that trust is a big barrier to people engaging with planning. So one way of building trust with communities might be to engage with existing groups in a more proactive way. So that might be, for example, if a local football club are affected by development, could the council engage that like a local sports groups in a proactive way to look at how that development can be improved to reduce the impact on the community. And then the final one is around digital exclusion. It's come up time and time again through this project. People are really concerned about how people who can't get online easily are going to engage with an online service, and we know that there is kind of a big gap in terms of it, like how inequality. If we want to build a service that doesn't kind of reproduce the inequality that the digital exclusion does, then we won't be reaching everybody. The second opportunity area is around data and standards. So Alex has already been through some of the detail of the testing that we would do to ensure that the data and the terminology are right. The second 2B is about creating a glossary of planning terms. And again, you'll see from our designs that we translated some of the planning jargon into more readable language. So for instance, calling a mixed redevelopment office space and hotel. So think about how we can make all of the language across the planning system more accessible. And then further testing with residents from underrepresented groups. And the third and final area again is around using feedback. So the first part of this recommendation is around identifying what the consultation needs are across the planning system. So there might be a need to get some input from residents around the local plan, and a need to get some inputs from residents around the community infrastructure levy, and a need to get some feedback from residents about a development. So could we bring all of those things together and ask a resident once the questions that cover all of those different areas, so that when you've got a resident engaged, you're getting kind of the most input that you can. And not requiring that resident to come back 3 or 4 times for different consultations. And then 3B will be about developing systems for analysing and sharing that feedback. It's all well and good like collecting data, but unless we actually do something with it and develop insights and share those insights and work out like what we do with that information and what we can action, then there's no point in collecting that data in the first place. And then the third one will be about re-engaging residents and developers once we have those insights. So how can we deepen that engagement? So that might involve, for instance, sharing back some of the insights that we have, and then seeing like what residents think should happen next, and or what developers think should happen next. So now I'm going to hand back over to Rich, I believe, to talk about the next steps.
Yeah, so there's the local digital team in MHCLG now has a continuous funding model for sort of projects that it can push ahead. So we've applied for some funding, which fingers crossed we can take some of the findings from this project forward. And I think we want to there are things around the playbook which we'll come on to shortly as well, which we want to sort of keep that going, but the focus for notices is going to be around trying to get a working site notice based on our current data and what we've got, and there may be like small improvements we can make to that, or just increase the breadth of the kind of data that's available. So, and focusing on the open data that we publish for that. The other side of that is seeing if we can align that sort of current data with some other authorities and make it scalable, just to demonstrate that it can be applied to other local authorities. And then the key thing being around these data standards, and we're aware of there's lots of other projects going on at the moment which are looking at underlying data and how we can do that. And so there are sets of data standards emerging already. You've already got things like the data hub, which the GLA helped produce, and that was sort of like an overall data schema. But then there's stuff emerging through the Reducing Invalid Planning Applications project and the Back Office Planning Systems project, and those are led by Lambeth and Southwark respectively. And so we're sort of aligning with what they're doing. And so a big part of what we want to do is been looking at that data, thinking, well, what do we need to do to be able to communicate it properly and collect the information in a meaningful way through this sort of future state notice, and trying to set out a data schema, a set of kind of standards that everyone can work towards. And we've got quite a good sort of community that we've built up on this, and so I think we'll continue working across those other projects and across other groups to try and establish a set of future data standards so that we can see where we want the system to go to sort of maximize all the benefits that we can get from consultation.
A slide should pop up asking you about data and the site notice.
Got it.
So yeah, if you can remember to the designs and the kind of demo that Alex went through, there was a bunch of content and data in there, and we're just interested to know how easily available that is for, at your local authority. I think there's about 15 people on the line, but we've only got 5 answers. But possibly that's because there's some people don't know, or
it's quite it's an interesting point, isn't it? Because like the way I look at this as well is that the big problem for us is that a lot of the data's there, it's just hidden, right? And it's not accessible, and that's the challenge, isn't it? So
exactly,
we've got the data, it's just not properly accessible as good data and as open data, isn't it?
So anyone that's that shared a response we're also interested to know if that data is if you publish your open data, or how available that is. If anyone's brave enough to come off mute and share a bit more about that. Sally, got your hand up?
Yeah, hi everyone. So Newcastle have really strong and firm positions about open data. So we do that a lot with like transport data, and we do that a lot with like the university as well. We have an urban observatory, I'm not sure if people are aware of. So we're really keen in this space, but I think everything that Richard's just said there is absolutely right. It's like, we know we've got the data, but getting access to it and being able to publish it and resource that, and then develop protocols which are already in place elsewhere in the organisation to say to people, this is what you have to do, is the kind of key challenge. There's a lot of behavioural change here, a lot of ownership and gatekeepers around, it's my data, why does somebody else want this, what value are they going to get from it? But I think the kind of work that you've done through this process and doing it through a sprint really shows what can be achieved, and if everyone's pulled together towards that, you know, common goal, and you've got the right people there, I think all of this is very achievable. My worry would be trying for people to do this alongside business as usual, and it kind of something that they come to and will do eventually. And in our discovery, we're talking about the challenges around like service improvement. When you label something service improvement and you bag that all together, it kind of gets put to the side. But if you say, actually, this is part and parcel of how we should be operating and doing it and making it mainstream, I definitely think there's a way through that.
Definitely. Thanks, Ellie. Has anyone had a similar experience around accessibility, or have got any anything to share around how you've got over that hurdle of actually making it more accessible and open?
I'm just going to say about Camden, because I think like we've got a really good, what I think is a really good open data portal, and the problem is that is that there could always be better quality data in there, and like I say, like the problem is so much of it in planning, which is, I mean, Sally's exactly right, it's just a cultural change, right, a massive cultural shift that's needed across planning, right, because we just are stuck in this world of sort of baking everything into massive PDFs and DNAs and not treating it as, and so we have to extract these bits of data out of it.
Sure.
And I think that's the challenge. But like where we've got it, I think we're like, Camden's really good at publishing it openly, and I think quite a lot of authorities are quite good at that now. And people are using it. And I think that's the other positive thing. People are using it. People are using the API keys to build their own things. We've got local groups going and building their own map systems, which do it. And in fact, that some local groups have even gone off and started digitizing stuff that's baked into PDFs, like appraisals. So they've started digitizing it and started to come up with their own kind of data schemas, which is brilliant, you know. But like, so there's like, you know, it just needs to be a massive cultural shift to try and just move that into, this is just how we have to operate. This isn't like this isn't a project, right? This is like this is just a work stream. This is what we have to do from now on. This is how we work.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else got any experiences to share? So I guess where we're at is the next stage would be great to be able to make this real and make this a working thing. But it needs, the version you saw was future kind of ideal state with lots of metrics in there around impact, and those are the ones that at the moment are much more inextractable in PDFs. So we're trying to explore, like, where is this data actually available, and what could an MVP version of this look like, and potentially have some of these or even one of these impact metrics in there as an example.
So this is me. I'm Ian. I'm the content designer on both of these projects, actually, but I'm going to be talking about the playbook bit now. So the playbook is all about digital engagement. So this would be, well, we didn't know entirely what it would be at the start. That's kind of part of the point, but ultimately a collection of resources around how to engage with different parts of the community, different audiences, through digital, whatever that might mean. So we started out with a survey. You can see there on the left-hand side, we surveyed 21 local authorities to kind of find out more and to start researching kind of the problems and the issues. We specifically asked about the pandemic and how that had affected people and whether it had changed the way that they work. And then kind of needs and motivations, that kind of thing. So we wanted to get like a good start by doing that kind of research where we asked a number of local authorities. We then ran a workshop which helped us define the purpose and objectives. So like I said, we weren't entirely sure what it would all be at the start. So that workshop allowed us to speak to people directly, but also start to really kind of hone in on what the playbook might be. And I might just show you some kind of fruits of that workshop in a second. We analysed those survey results, and that helped us put together kind of an initial taxonomy. Again, I'll show that in a second. So that's kind of how the information would be organised in the playbook, how it would be structured, kind of the labels, what things might be called, how information might be grouped, that kind of thing. We then created like a very, very first version using a couple of tools. So we're using Airtable for kind of the back end. So that's where all the data goes. Airtable is kind of a fancy spreadsheet, online spreadsheet. I'll show you that. And an app or a platform, website, I'm not quite sure it is, but it's called Softer, and it allows you to kind of quickly put together websites and web apps without using any code. We then tested the playbook. So we built that kind of first version, and we tested it with 5 local authorities to see what they thought, and to kind of get an idea or an initial idea of whether people would want to contribute. So is this going to be a kind of a centrally owned by a few people or a single organization kind of project, or could this be a community-led thing that gets opened up much wider? Based on that testing process, we then iterated on the design and changed it, and actually we scaled it back a lot, so that you're in a position hopefully now, as we pass this on, to start building it up and working together, fingers crossed. So I'll start doing a little demo, and then we'll talk about next steps at the end. That's what it looks like a bit. I'll just share my screen, bear with me. Okay, fingers crossed you can see that. Harriet, could you nod?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. So this is just to show you very briefly where the kind of some of the thinking. I'm not going to go into any detail, but this is all the kind of the workshops and the kind of the synthesis, the kind of figuring it all out afterwards that we did. So starting up here, thinking about initial topics on the top left-hand corner, but then when we started to hone down, if I can remember how to use Miro, we started to build a taxonomy here. So before we started actually building things in Airtable, putting things into the spreadsheet, we were just trying to use this kind of very, if we were together in a room, we'd have like a big wall and post it. So we just recreated that here, trying to build out what the playbook, how it might be organized and how we might structure it, the kinds of things people might filter by or search by, that kind of thing. So that was our first attempt. And then again, we start to kind of refine it after testing, and then eventually I think this would be the post-testing iteration. So you can see how the playbook and any project like this really kind of can start out messy, and then gradually through the testing process we start to refine it a lot more. I won't go into detail here because I can show you what it ended up like, but I thought that would be useful to get a bit of context. So from here we put that all into Airtable. I'm not sure if any of you have used this before, but it's very much a kind of a spreadsheet format. So we have each item, so an item on the playbook we're calling a resource. So every resource has a title, so we have a column that represents that field, so a resource title. We then have an image, and we have audience, planning stage, summary, requirements, so whether it's I guess that's how labor intensive it is to do the thing that the resource is talking about. A link, so we can go off to either external sites or to maybe an internal document. The environment, so urban, rural, that kind of thing, excuse me. The data is added, so that helps us organize, and then we've got which authority added it. So all of this data is in here. Now what we did through the testing processes was we ramped this back. You ramp things up, don't you? We're going to ramp them back. So we kind of put all of this into testing, and then for the MVP, for what we ended up with, we kind of scaled back a bit, but I can explain that in more detail. But what you're looking at here is the back end. This is the data, and it's really flexible. You can update it, you can add fields, you can experiment, and you can test, most importantly. What this looks like on the front, using an app called Softer. This is Softer, this is the back end of Softer. But the front end, so what the actual playbook looks like is this. So we have this big section here, which hopefully explains what it is. As we scroll down, we have kind of the playbook itself. So this says find a case study. So we went into the testing process with kind of 4 resource types. There were guides, case studies, templates, and tools. And it all tested well. So it was there was no real issue with that. There was kind of a need identified for all of those things. It was great. But for this project to go on, we feel like we need to do that scaling back and to really focus on getting one of those things right, building up content and going from there. In the same way, we had lots of filters. So what we have here is just filter by audience, but we had all of those things that I just showed you on there at first. It was a bit overwhelming. So again, scaling back now, but we'll leave all the data in the Airtable so you can build for the future. But how this works, we have a search function here. If I just type in something like commonplace, or even just common, should do the trick, then it will narrow down for me, and it will show me this one, which is public consultation on new place planning guidance using commonplace. And here we have the name of the council, so it's the local authority that added this to the playbook. We have the stage in the planning process that this applies to, and we even have this little upvoting button over here, which isn't super clear what that is and what it does. We can't change that at the moment, but for this kind of very first iteration, it's a good thing to kind of let people test which resources they find most useful. So people can click on that and it will change to a 2, etc. If I just delete the word comment, they will all reappear. Oops, I'll accidentally zoom in. Don't know how I did that. You can filter by audience. So you think, well, I just really want to find out how to engage digitally with older people. So you click on older people, this would rejig and it would be a shorter list. And all of those would apply to older people. You can filter more than one thing at a time. So older people who happen to be digitally excluded, it will filter again, and so on. You can remove those filters to go back to normal. If you want to find out more, so if we go back to the commonplace one here, if I were to click on that, it opens up and we have a page where the excuse me, where the case study exists. So it all exists on the playbook. It's not this particular case study here is all there to read. And as you scroll down, the link that I mentioned in the Airtable, that's what appears here too. So you can link off to other stuff. So if you wanted to go and find something that was particularly great on another website, you can do that too. All of this information here, that is being pulled from this Airtable. So that the summary here, that big bit of text, that's what this is here. So it's all coming from the same place. It's just displayed in this way. As we go down further, just very briefly, you can add more and more of these blocks. So if you wanted to, this is not set up at the moment, you could have like a newsletter, so people could sign up. Again, this idea of it being more of a community thing, people can sign up, get the latest 5 resources, whatever you want to do, something like that. We can have a help area, and you can share your thoughts, that kind of thing. It's just like a website. The other thing that we tested were 3 kind of routes in, which we called objectives. So they were learn, implement, and advocate. So we saw these as, and this came out of the survey actually, these kind of terms or this approach, and they tested well too. We had them as filters under here, but again, process of scaling back to be able to go forward was important, but also it seemed like there was some explaining that needed doing, so people weren't entirely clear on what those terms meant. So what we've done is we've created a getting started and a common problems page instead. And at the moment, this content needs working on. But if we click on getting started, this is kind of an intro to working with communities, engaging with them through digital tools. So what do we mean by digital engagement? Bit of copy up there. And then here we have some sort of key questions. Who do you want to engage? What are their expectations? What do you want from them? And engage with people who are not online. You've got all the tools here to create this in software and to create more content and to build on this. And again, under common problems, we have a similar sort of thing. Work in progress, but that was something that came out of testing. We created these pages from the feedback. And then lastly, again, if this is to be a community thing, we like the idea that anyone can add to this, that it becomes a real community project. So if you want to add something to the playbook, if you've got a great case study from your own authority, you can click on add resource and you can fill in this form. This form is generated by Airtable, and then we embed it here on the site created by Software. So anything that goes in here will automatically appear in Airtable and populate the playbook. There's a bit of an issue around moderation that we need to figure out how that works, but fingers crossed that won't be a huge problem. So there's some guidance in here too, so you can type in a title, choose an audience, add the case study. We've got some questions here, so to try and help guide what you write. You can add links and headings, etc. So on and so on, and then submit your resource, and it will an email will be fired off to whoever's in charge and has the responsibility for that. and you will see the resource hopefully appear down here shortly after that. So that's where we are with it at the moment. This is very much an MVP, so this is kind of a first iteration, like what can we build without quickly and that works, and it does, I think. So I think that's it. Did I miss anything there, Harriet?
No, don't think so. That's great.
Sorry, and if you don't mind,
okay.
can I jump in here? Because I want to say a bit about the case studies and how we're going to take it forward. So I think in relation to the case studies, the way we develop it now is kind of to include some different case studies in different shapes and different forms. So we kind of get on testing afterwards to see how those play out for different people in across local authorities. And I think is really important to kind of iterate the fact that in planning we are used to write quite a lot. So we want to have these case studies quite straightforward and direct and easy to accessible to everyone, really. But that is, I find, a challenge for us at the moment to kind of find that good balance of saying the right things and all the information, whilst maintaining a concise and good format. And as Ewan was saying, I think it would be really good to get the wider planning community to start adding resources as well, to collaborate with us on getting the playbook populated, and give an example of like how different case studies can take shape, but also think about future like guides and templates as well. A point that Ian actually highlighted, which is really interesting to identify notable events in the calendar for every local authority, really, and for Camden as well, where, for example, we start certain planning frameworks are being developed or reviews to the local plan, or even external events like a planning white paper, the further steps, and so on. And in the following months, we were looking to kind of have a structure that continues and add at least one resource type. And as I said, it could now develop into tools, guides, and templates, as well as case studies. As we see it going, and after we test it more to see how it works for everyone, we can consider adding new taxonomies. As you was showing you, we started from quite a lot, quite a dense map of information that was structured down. So maybe we will find that in time we can re-add some of the elements we thought of at the beginning that would be useful. And again, carry user testing. So we think that user testing is really important, and it kind of shows like the how we think about certain things that they work for everyone, but actually we find out that just 10 of us think that, and that's really important for the good development of the product. And we want to engage with other local authorities and starting and those partners in other local authorities to start sharing the playbook wider, so we get more contributions, but also just share it with wider communities. So maybe people are also influenced by different tools and different case studies to run their own engagement within their small communities. What software does is that it can show analytics of how the website is used. So that would be good to see in time, like how people are using it, and identify maybe things that need to change or adapt, or just maybe they are good to keep for future as well. The email newsletter we think is a really good idea, and that we can bring people back into the playbook. For example, we now added some case studies that in relation to consultation, the one that Ian just showed with Commonplace for West End Lane, that is ongoing. So we started adding that in, and as part of the newsletter, that can be introduced a end date for it to be updated, so the users would receive an email to say the consultation will finish in this amount of time. You will find that the impact that is had within this amount of time. So it has that continuity. And lastly, to review the front end and see how that works for everyone, and again, maybe have some user testing and see if it needs to change or if it's fine the way it is. I think for us it's really important to have that discussions with the local authorities and get that going. But yeah, we will continue collaborating with everyone.
Yeah, I suppose on this point of case studies, like something that came up in the user testing was that some people didn't feel they had anything to share because maybe they were from quite a small council or like a department that's quite underfunded. So there's lots of barriers to doing digital engagement because they don't have the money and they don't have the buy-in from council leadership to start doing things differently. And that was kind of what the thinking was around the common problems page, that like we might be able to start to give people some advice or think about how to start to build more support for digital engagement internally, but also
Definitely.
Contribution point of view, like we to make it relevant to lots of different types of people, that we actually need those case studies from people that have done small things, because somebody who like wrote a business case to get some like more funding or some support from the comms team, the central comms team, to like do digital engagement is super relevant to like loads and loads of councils. It doesn't have to be like a big piece about commonplace or an expensive tool.
Yeah, really good point. If you refresh, there are a few answers coming through, Harriet, that I can see.
A pub inquiry.
Yeah, what's the pub inquiry?
Sorry, it's pub inquiry. It's shortened for. Well, it did involve a pub actually. It was a conversion of a pub into a supermarket, basically, which we only partially won. But it was a good example. I felt that we could try and test it on, perhaps.
What was particularly interesting about that example in terms of engagement?
It involved a lot of protests and placards and whatnot, and the residents felt at times that they weren't being heard, right? And I felt that this tool could be perfect for them. They could voice their concerns, and be seen to be and be seen to be heard too, possibly.
I think we've had a few digital public inquiries now, haven't we? And they've been adapted. Yeah. I mean, I actually think like as well, one thing which missed out is planning committees as well, because people do them all slightly differently, and there are sort of benefits to different ways of executing them, and they've all got slightly different levels of participation. So I think stuff like that can be really valuable, although obviously the government has indicated that they don't intend to allow digital council meetings after the beginning of May. So that might put a dampener on it. But my feeling is that would be that long term that would be a bit mad to sort of go backwards like that. So I think those kinds of case studies would still be really valuable for if and when things are sort of relaxed or go into like hybrid kind of part digital meetings in the future.
There's a couple more coming up as well if you want to keep refreshing. But who wrote the bit about the social media campaign to increase participation?
What did that involve? So as part of our general communications campaign for emerging policy frameworks in the borough of the last year, we have had to kind of adapt and advertise points of consultation in different ways. And one way that we found to be quite effective is through social media, and that can be
targeted, where you actually pay people like Facebook to target specific locations or even specific demographics, or it can also involve using the council's main pages, which are less specific but have a potentially bigger broadcast. So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Nextdoor, these types of platforms, and because of the fact that they allow users to actually share the content themselves or like or comment, it does kind of amplify the reach that you get. So particularly if you're not doing targeted stuff, you can actually get reach quite a lot of people without too much additional cost. So yeah, happy to expand, but maybe we can hear from someone else as well.
Bro, thanks, John. Would anyone else like to share? What was the development brief via Citizen Space? John, don't tell me that was you again.
No, it was me.
Oh,
yeah.
Great.
Yeah, so we recently, I've been trying to think about things sort of in the COVID time.
Yeah.
And this was a quite a big consultation for a site that has gone through the local plan process. And Citizen Space, as said, Roadbucks is a unitary authority. So I think Citizen Space was previously used by other parts of the council. So this has been certainly my first experience in using Citizen Space. And it's trying to, I suppose, find a more neutral channel for residents to engage with and stumble across these consultations, sort of looking at everything all together rather than the planning part of the website, for example. It's been quite insightful because even you can give someone a survey and try and help guide them along the process with sort of plain English, but we did find that actually still lots of people would rather just send an email in. Maybe that's just the specific audience and demographic, but it's a newer way of us putting material out on a development brief. So maybe something we'll do again in the future, but we're still kind of processing that consultation. But it's been quite useful. There's a thing in Buckinghamshire called community boards. So they're kind of local forums for residents to engage with, and I know they've been used a lot for disseminating this information. But yeah, quite an interesting case for us and something we'd be happy to share our experiences on.
Yeah, brilliant. Did you find that the sharing that or capturing that in a more structured way was more helpful for your team as well, rather than having to look through detailed emails? Or
I think that was the aspiration, because I think when it was quite a complex site that had specific considerations that we're looking for feedback on, and I think there was maybe a bit of misunderstanding about the difference between a development brief and a planning application. So I think some people's responses maybe didn't go down the survey route, even though the survey is optional, where you can say what's your thought on this specific process. It does seem very mixed on the people who did answer those specific questions, but also people obviously wanting to have their own way of communicating that, and that's obviously not something that that platform is. It promotes a survey, but what we found is even though you can offer that platform, some people will still want the alternative ways of contacting. So that would be something we take away and be like, how can we restructure it in the future, so that people feel that they can just go down one line of communication and still get their messages across. But yeah, just feel like
interesting. Thanks, Emily. And who would anyone else like to share? What about the digital engagement using Commonplace on transport schemes?
Hi, yeah, that was mine, Sally from Newcastle. So we've used Commonplace on delivering transport schemes that have linked into sort of wider major schemes and sort of master planning around an area, and Commonplace was used really well on consulting on specific schemes. And I think there's a lot of things that we've learned through that we could apply to planning, but it has been very fixed within the sort of transport space. So when you speak to colleagues about what tools do we use to consult and engage, we use standard, like, let's talk, ask a question, get an answer kind of setup that we've got internally. That's the corporate response. Oh yeah, and by the way, transport have done some really great things with Commonplace, but that's in transport. So I think there's a really great example there around sort of the multidisciplinary aspects that can be drawn from using Commonplace and how that could be applied elsewhere.
Definitely, and kind of mapping that consultation and feedback that's happening more like across services, and where it could be useful to different teams, and taking more of a holistic view of that, as well as from a technology and tool perspective. Great, thanks, Sally. Rich, would you like to say anything to wrap up?
Well, I only to say that, get in touch with us if you are interested in continuing to work with us or joining in with what we're trying to do with it. Hopefully we will be able to go on to the next phase of the project, and thanks for everyone's input so far. And then also just like a massive thanks to everybody at FutureGov. Like, you've been a great team. You've been like really easy and great to work with. And I think we've just learned a lot from you as well, from like the process of doing the project. So it's been really great. And like, with the some of the outputs of the project as well, like we didn't necessarily expect to have like, kind of front end MVP of the playbook and things like that. So we've sort of leaped ahead further than where we thought we'd be. So, it's really, really good. So just a big thanks to all of you guys.
Cool. Thanks very much. Thanks everyone for coming along, and let us know if you have any questions, then feel free to ask them now. Otherwise, have a good rest of the day.